Hello.
So I wanted to make a video really quick about Tucker Carlson. I saw something about that. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and they were talking about UFOs and how Tucker Carlson said that UFOs were demonic. Okay. I've got a lot to say about that. It's a Christian thing. It's a Christian thing to want to label everything, absolutely everything. If it's not of God, it's demonic. Okay, so then what is... Okay, never mind. That'd be a stupid thing to say. Let me see. What is your iPhone? Is your iPhone demonic? I know a lot of the content on there is demonic. No, but for real, right? Is your pickup truck demonic? Your pickup truck's not of God. Sure, it's made up of things that are derived of God, because God created the metal, God created the oil that we use for consumption, the oil that we use for burning. Sure, God created those things, and we melded and welded and did all sorts of stuff to make that useful. But this idea that that the UFOs are demonic, I want to bring stuff down to earth for you. You get it? UFOs. That's not the UFO thing. What is that? Is that Hunger Games? I think that's Hunger Games. That's not it. Okay. Hold on. Like this? That's what it is. Yeah. But yeah, I wanted to talk about that because, I have plenty of experiences with UFOs, and I noticed that it is for people who live in the big cities, they tend not to see stuff. But for people who kind of like live way out in the wilderness, they tend to see more stuff. And so I live way out in the woods. There's zero night pollution. So almost every single night I can see every star in the sky. And so I can see a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense in science terms, right? Because in the vacuum of space, everything holds a trajectory. And, comets, they fly in straight lines. Satellites, they fly in straight lines. Everything flies in straight lines, and they just go in straight lines. And there's no crazy fast changing of trajectory, right? You're not going to see a comet that just comes around and then makes a little loop and heads back in the other direction. That doesn't exist. Certainly not at that speed. Now, at the planet level, yes, a comet could come around, pick up a gravitational pull of a planet and get looped around in another direction. Sure, but it's not going to happen in half a second, right? In a quarter of a second, because these are big mass bodies. And so if you're going to see this light in the sky, it's a mass of body. And for that mass to hit another planet and get looped around, it's not going to be in a quarter of a second, right? And so when you see these lights in the skies that are looping around and jumping all over the place and appearing and then disappearing and moving to another part and appearing and then disappearing and moving to another spot and appearing and then moving while they're appearing, they're just having fun, basically teenagers drifting, they're, doing donuts in the parking lot, And I think that that's kind of an important point to make, is that, Christians in the United States, there's only two prevailing creation theories, and I think they are so freaking stupid. You guys know my belief. I'm not Christian. I've been Christian, grew up Christian, independent, fundamental Baptist, did that for 25 years, 26 years, 25, I don't remember. 25 years, grew up as independent fundamental Christian, took it super serious, all that kind of stuff. Life fell apart, devoted my life to God, and God basically walked me right out of Christianity. And I have a bunch of videos on it. You can go back and look for them. I'm not going to tag them down below. You can just go you may find one by, why I left Christianity, or I think it was one of the video titles or something like that. But the whole point was, I was at the bottom of my life. I had just attempted suicide, and I was just like, you know what? I don't care. I'm completely devoting my life to you. And basically it was like a little gummy ball trail just leading me away from Christianity. And because it was leading me away from Christianity, I was super scared that it was demonic. I was super scared that it was satanic. And so I basically required God to send me sign after sign after sign after sign after sign to put me at ease and to put my soul at ease in leaving Christianity. And so, stuff would happen to me all the time. My television would turn on, and it would be a preacher by itself. My television would turn on by itself, and it would be a preacher preaching, just trust God, just keep going down that path that he's got you leading on, and all this kind of stuff. 2:00 in the morning. My little Apple TV, Google TV deal that sits beside me in bed. I'd be sitting there in bed, and, I'd be like, God, I just need a sign. I just need a sign. I feel like I've gone too far into the demonic stuff, because in Christianity, anything that isn't Christian is demonic, right? And so I was watching channeled content like The Law of One by Raw. I was watching channeled content from Next Level Soul, which is a YouTube channel. And I was just like, this is all too demonic for me. And God, please, I need a sign. And I would go on to my work day, and I would be at a restaurant, and this Christian girl would walk up to me and say, I don't know why, and she's obviously Christian. She's got a Bible in her hand. She's just like, I don't know why I feel like saying this to you, but I just feel like God wants me to tell you that you're going the right way. And then she walks away. I'm like, if I told you the direction I was going in, you would lose your shit. You would tell me I'm going to hell. And, it just happened time and time again. And so, and so those are kind of the things that put me at ease in walking away from Christianity, because whenever I got so scared, I was like, God, I need a Christian to come comfort me right now. And a Christian would come comfort me, and I'd be put at ease, and okay, I'll walk a little farther, and so, yeah, and it's been great. It's been amazing. I've lived a more fulfilling life, a more emotionally stable life, certainly a more accepting of others and more openly loving of others life. Because in Christianity, you can love everybody, but that trans person, they're going to hell, clearly, right? And so, I love them, but I don't love their sin, right? It's stupid shit that comes out of Christians' mouths. And so anyways, which that in of itself is kind of funny. It's like, I just said that I was more peaceful, and here I am saying stupid shit's coming out of Christians' mouths. I'm a hypocrite. Smack me. But yeah, and it's like the whole hypocrisy thing, it's like people throwing around, you hypocrites, and all this kind of stuff, which in reality, the people who are more hypocrites are people who are Christians. Because a person who's not Christian, they just live their lives as they are. That's it. They just live their lives as they are. If they're a two-faced person, you're going to know it, because they're going to show you that they're a two-faced person. If they're a mean person, you're going to know it, because they're going to show you that they're a mean person, right? The only hypocrites that I know are Christians, because they go to the church and they say that they're this perfect and holy being, and then they go to the bar on the weekends and they're cussing out everybody, Or they're not cussing out everybody, but they're cussing up a storm, and they're drinking and all this kind of non-Christian heathen things. And it's just like, okay, so that's a hypocrite, because they're portraying themselves as one person, but then when they show up to do their dark side of their life, they're, so, okay, they're two-faced, they're hypocrites. everybody who I know who is not Christian, they're not hypocrites. They're pretty upfront with who they are, you know? And so I saw this one video of a guy who was like, you heathens are hypocrites and all this kind of stuff. And he was just like going at a whole bunch of people who were non-Christians, the sinners, right? And I just thought it was funny because a lot of his insults were, I was just like, you're just pointing right at yourself, man, you know? And anyways, that's not what I'm here to talk about. The point is, we're talking about the UFO stuff, right? And in the United States, we only have, you have the creation theory and then you have the evolution theory. Those are the two predominant theories for how we exist. And then there's the spaghetti god. That's a fun one. But you know, there's creation theory with Christianity, backed by Christianity. And then you have the evolutionist theory that nothing exists and we are just this anomaly out here. And the thing that's stupid is that there's those two things evolve around God. First of all, evolution comes from the idea that God doesn't exist. And so they go and they find all of their evidence to prove that God, or they come up with a theory that God doesn't exist. They come up with this way of explaining everything, how everything has come to be, while God doesn't exist, right? On the Christian side of things, Christians come from the idea that God does exist, but God only exists through Christianity. And so a lot of the things, the theories that they come up with are only theories that fit with the Bible. And if it doesn't fit with the Bible, it, just like with the evolutionists, it gets tossed out, right? With the evolutionists, they find a theory. If it's a little bit too closely aligned with the Bible, they kind of toss it out, right? With the Christians, with their evolutionists, with their creation theory, if everything has to fit within the Bible. Like this new one that just came out, I want to say maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the idea that the planet is only 4,000 or 6,000 years old, young planet theory. And that's just kind of crazy, right? Because we have human civilizations that are older than 6,000 years old, right? So how is the entire planet only 6,000 years old if we have civilizations that date back to 20,000 years, right? So, but then on the same side, on the evolution side of things, you have this planet is 4.8 billion years old. The planet 4.8 billion, the universe 4.8 billion years old. I don't know which one it is. I think it's kind of stupid. You have this theory that God doesn't exist and that we are just these big, massive rocks floating around and we just happen to exist, right? Which I always thought was really stupid. And whenever I was walking away from Christianity, it led me down to a path that, you know, God exists and every planet, or not every planet, but every religion tries to restrict access to God via their belief systems, which only does one thing. If you're outside of the religion, you're going to go to hell, whether it's Christianity, Hindu, whatever, right? If you're outside of the religion, you're going to go to hell, right? Muslim. If you're outside of the religion, you're going to go to hell. But if you're inside the religion, then you're safe, right? But then whenever you hear about miracles happening for people outside of that religion, it's kind of a scratching your head deal. Must be of Satan then, right? One of Divine Light, there's a place in Houston that is a association of Divine Light. And they're out of like Japan or something like that. And I attended one of their little gatherings, and it was just a little bit too religious for me, a bit too structured. And it just felt, I don't like structure. My Sunday services, I went to a place in Alaska called the Center, the Anchorage, was it Alaska Center or Anchorage Center? But it was Alaska Center for Spiritual Living. And I loved that place because it was so unstructured. You just show up and it's a whole bunch of people who love each other and they're there to worship God, and they're not putting a fence around God. They're allowing God to be as big as God is, and they're not trying to put any fences around it. And I really like that because I don't think you can put a fence around God, right? I think he is just so big and so massive that any attempt to label him is a limitation, and it's stupid. It's like, if you're the only person that lives in the state of Arizona and it's nothing but desert, and you're the only person that lives in the state of Arizona, why would you put a fence around your property? You don't need to. You're the only person who lives there, right? And if another person comes in, you'd say, we live in this place. Look how big it is. It's great, isn't it? Right? But then you put a fence between you two. And then another person moves in. Oh, and look how this place is pretty good. But this is mine. And then next thing you know, you box yourself into this little tiny box. And you're living in this big, massive space. But you've boxed yourself into this little tiny community, right? And that's kind of what happens with Christianity and God. God exists, sure. I feel like that's a given. A lot of people try to say that it's not. Cool. But God exists. And any attempt to put him in a religion is just an attempt to limit him, right? When you look at the Old Testament versus the New Testament, it doesn't make any sense. You have this God who basically breaks every single rule in the Ten Commandments. I am a jealous God, really, because you tell us not to be jealous and not to covet, and do not kill, whereas God kills how many people? I mean, thousands of innocent women and children. Tucker Carlson says that, no, it wasn't Tucker Carlson. Oh, Holy War. I think that's what something that had come up that he was kind of reprimanding, but it's like, your God supports holy war. Your God supports a chosen people. Your God supports limiting to this. And this is why I say that, God is too big for Christianity. And what I've always said is that God is this spring in the desert that's free for everybody. And everybody tries to go around that spring and fence it in so that the only way you can experience the spring is if you're inside the fence, right? You can experience God anywhere, right? Omnipotent, omniscient, that is truly the characteristics of God, right? But then you look at the stories in the Bible and then it falls apart, right? And that's my whole point, is that yes, God is, but God is not Christian, because if God was Christian, then why would God regret? And in the Bible, God regrets. If God was Christian, why would he create this planet if he knew that it was going to result in millions of souls going to hell, right? If God was truly, knew everything, then he would knew that when he created Adam and Eve, that he would inevitably end up having to kill almost everybody on the planet except for Noah before he created it. So why wouldn't he just tweak his beginning design, right? Why wouldn't he just leave humans off of the planet and enjoy the planet as it was, right? And so that's why I say is like with the creation theories, it is so hard to try to keep God, so you have the creation theory in the United States, you have the evolution theory in the United States. God doesn't exist. God is Christian. Those are the two camps, right? And it's pretty stupid because when we see phenomenon that can't be explained by evolution, that can't be explained by Christianity, everybody loses their shit. And it's stupid, like one of my pastors. Now I know not every religion has this thought, but I was speaking to somebody. Why am I taking this story as my own? It's not. I heard of somebody who is speaking to a pastor, and they were talking about how they felt like they needed to come get their house cleansed because there was a ghost or a spirit inside of the house. The pastor's response was, there's no such thing as ghosts. When people die, they either go to heaven or hell. That's it, and okay, well, there's crap happening inside my house. So how do I explain that? Great, there's only heaven and hell. That's cool. But there's stuff happening in my house, right? And so she ended up going to the Catholics, and the Catholics, that is within their belief system. And so because it's within their belief system, they can help. So they went out to the lady's house and blessed the house and all that kind of stuff in order to get the ghost to leave. Great. But my point is that because it did not exist in that pastor's belief system, he completely threw it out and rejected it, right? And that's what happens. We form these belief systems, evolution, Christian creation, and if anything happens outside of that belief system, we just throw it away. And it can't be true, right? It's like one of my friends, for the longest time, this guy thought that narwhals didn't exist. And I was like, a whale with a horn. Oh my God, you are so stupid. That doesn't exist. You are so stupid. And he was like railing on me at how stupid I was. And I'm like, okay, buddy. And now we live in the century where when we have a debate, we can just pull up our cell phone. But, one day I'm sure that guy is going to go to the zoo and see a narwhal and just be baffled. Oh my God. It's just like, yeah, you were the one who was rejecting this. It always existed. You were the one who was rejecting that. So the point of the video, talking about UFOs, they have always existed. Evolutionists have to reject them because in the academic, so it's more complicated than that. In the academic field, when you work so hard to get tenure and you're a professor and you're a publishing professor, you have to maintain your integrity, right? You can't be seen as a crazy guy. And whenever you would bring up anything to do with UFOs, you would be seen as a crazy guy. And so, that whole situation basically ends in you losing your integrity. People stop publishing. Maybe you don't get to publish any books anymore. You lose your funding. You may lose grant money. And so there's huge consequences for trying to back any of these theories. And so you just, okay, they don't exist, right? Whereas hush, hush, hey, I actually think there might be something here, right? Okay, yeah, sure, that exists. But for the masses, they don't exist. In the Christian psyche, aliens and UFOs never existed either because, oh yeah, the bugs are out tonight. Aliens and UFOs never existed, aliens and UFOs. Other beings, other planets that have life on them, those don't exist because God only created us, right? And so in the Christian psyche, those also don't exist. And we are the only planet here. Okay, so in the evolutionist thing, because we have not found another planet with obvious life on that planet, we throw out the idea that the entire universe has the potential to have life. And I was talking with one of my buddies who's in college right now, and I told him, I was like, yeah, it's like, that it's crazy to think how many other planets exist out there and what kind of life forms that they have. And he touts off, You know, they actually did a statistical analysis of the probability of life in other parts of the universe, and they found the statistical probability to be 1 in 34 quintillion or something like that. And it's like, okay, we exist, you know? It's like, you want to take that argument, by your argument, we just happen to happen. So why is it so hard to believe that, you know, and that statistical analysis comes from the fact that we, sitting on a planet, are looking at other planets with telescopes to try to see if they have planets. We're not actually going in there and sampling water and sampling the floor and putting things under a microscope to see if there's life there, right? But it's the evolutionist theory, right? Because we haven't found something yet, it doesn't exist. No, you just haven't found it yet. And then with the creationist theory, well, that stuff just doesn't exist. There are some Christians who think that God may have gone out and created other humans, not other humans, but other planets and things like that. And there's a lot of Christians that think that this is the only planet that exists and that God created this one. My belief, God is. And so my question is, how many of us are there, right? Because in my belief system, God simply is, and he enjoys creating things. And so if he enjoys creating things and he takes great pleasure in creating things, how many of us planets are out there, right? And so for me, when I see a UFO pop in the sky, it is not outside of my belief system that exists. So it doesn't bother me at all. You know, when I see these things of, oh my God, look, there's all these, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't shake me at all because it's perfectly within my belief system, right? Christians, it can rattle a Christian, and they rush to put it under a category. I heard one person on a video of the Christians calling the UFOs angels. And now here's Tucker Carlson on the Joe Rogan show calling these UFOs demonic and something we need to be afraid of. And it's like, first of all, Christians have no idea what the hell these things are because it's not in their belief system, so they don't know what to perceive, right? In the evolutionist theory, they don't exist, so they just keep gaslighting all of the people who have genuine experiences. Me, the first time I ever saw a UFO, I was maybe 12 years old, something like that. My dad dropped me off here from Houston. I'm about an hour and a half outside of Houston. He dropped me off for a 3-day weekend with a rifle while I was 12 years old, and he said, go have your fun in the woods. I did want to go hunting. I did not want to go alone for 3 fucking days. And so he just left me out there. And so I kind of just spent 3 days. Now there was a house here, so I was able to like jerry rig my way inside of a house and kind of stay inside the house. But for the most part, it was just me alone out here for 3 days. And so, the house that I was inside of, had a bunch of porcelain dolls. I can't stand porcelain dolls. I hate them. I think the only use for a porcelain doll is target practice. I don't like porcelain dolls. If we took a bomb to every porcelain doll on this planet, I would be at peace. No, I'm just kidding. But my point is, I hate porcelain dolls. I can't rest around them. So, and that's just because whenever I was a kid, I would have nightmares, and those nightmares would involve those porcelain dolls. And so, so very often, instead of staying inside the house, I would take my gun and I would just go sit in my makeshift blind that I had set up during the daytime and just kind of spend the night in there. Because I felt much safer just out in nature than I did inside that house with those damn dolls. And so I would just stare up at the stars, and you know, you'd see your shooting stars go by, you'd see your meteorites go by, you see your asteroids just take absolutely forever as they're crossing the sky, right? And you'd see satellites, and you'd see airplanes, and you'd see all sorts of stuff. Well, one of those nights that I was out there, I started seeing these things just kind of like darting all over the place. Well, they weren't darting all over the place. They were on, off, on, off, on, off. And they were really slow, and they were blinking at like a second per or whatever. Now, at the time, I was Christian, and I didn't know what these were. And in my belief, they couldn't exist. So, I kind of just chalked the whole thing up to whatever, that's crazy. So these things start coming together. They're coming together. Then I see another one over my head. They're coming together. They're coming together. They're coming together. They stop in this triangle formation, and they're just kind of pulsing together. And then they start rotating a little bit as they're pulsing together. Now, mind you, this is all happening out in the stars, and I'm alone out in the woods. So I'm not necessarily feeling safe at this point, except that I do have my rifle. So I do feel kind of safe because I have my gun. And so, flick off the safety kind of thing while I sit there and watch these things that my bullet is clearly not going to reach. And out of nowhere, they just stop rotating. And then there's this big, massive explosion that happens between the three of them. And then two of them go right across the sky, just dart off. And then the third one just slowly turns around like nothing ever happened and just starts going back across the sky, on, off, on, off, on, off, just like that. And I remember just being scared as shit and wanting to be home, but having to wait another day because back in those days, we didn't have phones. And I lived in a place where there was no cell signal. So even if I could come across a BlackBerry, there would be no way that I would be able to call home, right? So yeah. Anyways, so my whole point, and since then I've seen a lot more stuff. I mean, I've probably had 8 or 9 instances, hell, maybe even over 10 instances, where I've just seen things that could not be explained by science. And both me just by myself and somebody with me, and that's kind of where I really solidified it in my mind that it's like, okay, no, this is actually happening because it's being perceived by another human and being spoken about by another human other than me, right? And so, because you could always chalk it up to wild hallucinations. And so, I was taking my ex-wife, we were driving to dinner to San Antonio for our anniversary. And on the drive to San Antonio, this big, massive green orb, maybe the size of a beach ball, or maybe twice the size of a beach ball, pops up beside our car, maybe 150 feet away from it. We're passing a bunch of cornfields. We're the only people on this section of roadway. And it's kind of like dusk. It's not really sunny, but it's not really dark. It's kind of dusky. And this big, massive green light just, and it just orb just hovering beside our car. And while we're driving, the orb is following us. It's matching our speed, and it's just hovering outside of our car. Maybe 10 seconds. It wasn't long. And out of nowhere, the orb just shoots off and collapses into nothing, right? Because there was a tree line, and so we could see the tree line, and the orb shot toward the tree line and then just disappeared. But they didn't disappear into the trees because then you'd be able to see them go through the trees. They just disappeared into air, right? It was my wife's first time. And she was like, "Did you just see that?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Yeah. So she was really concerned by the whole thing. But like I said, in my belief system, it's perfectly reasonable. It happens all the time. I've interacted with ghosts before. Why? Because it's within my belief system to do so. I don't necessarily have the belief system anymore where when a person dies, they either go to heaven or they go to hell, and there's no in between. When I see a person leave their body, their spirit gets to decide where they want to go. Because why? Because after you leave your body, you're still you. So it's like, okay, do I want to go see God? Or do I want to hang out and see what people are up to? Do I want to go visit this site that I always wanted to go see? I've always wanted to go to Rome. Well, before I take off, why don't I go to Rome real quick and just zoom over to Rome, right? It's just whatever, right? So, and so, whenever I see these things in the sky, when I see UFOs or any sort of kind of like these things that can't be explained by science, it doesn't bother me, because my belief system is that God exists. He's created so many planets because he enjoys creating. And it's almost certain to be at least 700 planets out there that have surpassed our intelligence. Oh my God, I can't even. I mean, 700 sounds stupid. I'm thinking more like thousands, right? That have surpassed our intelligence. That's not such a big deal, right? It's not that hard to believe. When you take a picture or when you look at the photo of deep space, NASA had released a photo, the furthest out photo they had ever taken, and the most zoomed in and the most farthest out they had ever taken. And what do you see? Galaxies, 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 just everywhere. So why do we think that we're the only ones in the Milky Way galaxy? Which, number one, we haven't even explored the Milky Way galaxy, but there are thousands and thousands and probably millions and billions of galaxies. And we think we're the only ones, really. And we think that all of those galaxies were the most intelligent ones, really. Like, please, stop being so stupid and naive. That's harsh, okay? You can be naive, but just, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call you stupid. But yeah, to me, it's just like, it is such a naive thing to think that like, oh no, I'm Christian and I know how everything happened. Okay, so the flood happened, right? And Christianity only exists inside of the flood. This is what I love. I think this is hilarious. When you go around the planet, Aboriginal people will have tales of a flood. People who have never seen, random pockets of people in like the Polynesian, they have tales of the Great Flood. All these things have tales of the Great Flood that happened, right? Christianity takes the fact that all of these other cultures have a flood myth as evidence to support their belief. Here's the reality. The flood myth means there was a flood. Does not mean that Christianity is the one true gospel or is the one true religion, right? What it means is that there was a flood. Sure, you wrote about it in the book, okay, but the book was only written, maybe 5,000 years, 7,000 years, right? Which technically speaking, that's already bordering the beginning of time. But these civilizations that had been older, that had been around for tens of thousands of years, like the Hopi have been around for 20-something thousand years or 40-something thousand years. How long have the Hopi been around? So, number one, the planet right in and of itself, how long have the Hopi tribe existed? And obviously the Hopi tribe has to come from somewhere, right? Okay, dates back to at least 10,000 CE. I want to know about Göbekli Tepe. How old, Jesus, iPhone, is Göbekli Tepe? Göbekli Tepe is around 12,000 years old, with its earliest structure dating approximately 9,500 BCE. Religious sanctuary. Okay, oldest exposed structures built between 9,500 and 9,000 BCE. Okay, so Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. So the idea that the planet is only 6,000, throw that out though. Well, now you got to move it to 12, because if that's the earliest known human civilization, you should at least be able to match that, right? And so yeah, for me, For me, the thing is this. The creator creates because he's bored or whatever reason, and he enjoys creating. And it's only a he because I'm saying a he. I can also say she, right? There's plenty of debate and I say there's plenty of debate. The Christians don't know that this debate exists because the Christians don't look into anything that goes against their theology. If it goes against what their beliefs are, they completely throw it out as heresy, and they never look into it. But if they look into it, what they'll find is that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is most likely the Father, the Son, and the Mother, right? And so there's this whole thing about the feminine and all this kind of crazy that, the reason why we have these structures is because the church wanted to silence women because whatever. I don't know. I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail because, to be quite frank, I don't know enough about it to speak about it intelligently. And so I'm just not going to get into that. But as far as the creationist thing goes, I can't speak from that point because I have experience that I do know. And so yeah, the Christian thing, Tucker Carlson called these things demonic. They're not demonic, okay? They are as natural as birds in the sky. Why? Because ancient stories have existed about them for thousands and thousands of years. Aborigine, they talk about the star people. The Hopi talk about being rescued by the star people during the Great Flood. And that during the Great Flood, the star people came down and spoke with the ant people of the earth. And the Hopi people went with the ant people inside of the earth, where they stayed inside of the earth while they waited for the flood to take care of itself. And then when the flood took care of itself, the ant people of the earth brought the Hopi back out of the earth and back out to where they sit in Arizona. And so inside of their beliefs, there are star people, there are ant people, there are all these different sorts of beings that are of higher intelligence than humans. So it doesn't bother them, right? And so yeah, Tucker Carlson saying that these things are demonic, it bothers me because it shows it's inciting fear for no reason, okay? These things have been around for probably, they probably could even have had some sort of influence in how our world came about, right? I mean, if you have these civilizations that have been older than us and longer than us, then there's a good possibility that they've also been around, long enough to have influenced art, especially if they're popping into our skies and stuff. Then it's very likely that they could have had some sort of influence on the creation of our species or different species on the planet. Or maybe they took some of the trees here to another place. Who knows what they've done, right? But if NASA built a space shuttle to go to another planet and found life, guess what we would be doing? We'd be taking a claw and grabbing it and taking it back to our laboratories. And we're like, oh my God, let's see if we can make this thing grow here, right? And if it grows here, will it grow in our soil? And then the next thing you know, we have a whole ecological collapse because we're now introducing new species into very unstable ecological systems that require different keystone species. So let's not do that either. But the point is that, it's not hard to fathom, I like to think of humans, as if we look at dolphins, right? I imagine that they look at us the same way that we look at dolphins, right? We look at dolphins as these really cool animals that exist on our planet, and they can communicate with each other and they can sing. And we probably look at sperm whales. Oh my God, they can communicate over vast distances, and they have these different calls in order to communicate with each other. That's so cool. Oh, look, there's this human looking thing that it communicates with these really strange vocals, and they've learned to do this with their tongues and whatever to make these, whatever, their brains, whatever, I don't care. The whole point is, oh, that's so cool, right? But I don't feel like it's such a big deal to look at the sky and say, oh, look at those things up there. That's so cool. Who knows where they're from? Maybe they're from this planet. Who knows, right? But it's like, oh, look, there are these different beings. There's these different creatures that are coming out of the sky. Oh, that's so cool. Why don't you tell us about your planet? Why don't you tell us about the way you run your stuff? Because we obviously can't run shit here, you know? It's like, help us out a little bit, will ya? You know? And so, but anyways, you know, I don't want to go into the whole thing too much about like what different beings are out there, what they potentially have to offer. I don't know, you know. There's obviously beings out there. And when I say obviously, I don't come from a place of believing. I come from a place of firsthand experience. I know that there's people out there, just like I know that narwhals exist, right? And if you don't know that narwhals exist, right? Here's the thing. I personally have never seen a narwhal. I've never seen a narwhal, but I still know that they exist, right? I should go to an aquarium one day and look at a narwhal just so I can, if I did do that, then I wouldn't be able to use this as an example anymore. So I will go back to not seeing narwhals. Look, here's a picture of narwhals. Isn't that cool? They're whales with horns. They live in the Arctic. They have a horn that sticks out the front. They're whales. They have horns. Anyways, all right, enough of that. My whole point is that, you know, just because you haven't seen something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. You know, one of my friends was like, well, I haven't seen it, so I know it doesn't exist. I'm like, you're taking the mind of a scientist. Like, that's literally a scientist's mind. But it's like, just because you haven't perceived anything, like just in his argument, I was like, okay, well, you haven't firsthand experience seen an airplane crash. So do airplane crashes not exist just because you haven't firsthand experienced one? We know that they are, right? And so it's just one of those things, you know. Every culture on this planet has, they know they exist. And if you look up Dr. Stephen Greer, he has a group. He does all sorts of things to like bring out contact and stuff like that. Well, he's pushing for contact, I think is what he's trying to do. I don't know. But the whole idea, according to Stephen Greer, is that the reason why these beings won't come here and say hello to us is because every time they try to come by, we try to kill them, right? A perfect example is the humans that are in that little pocket in the Amazon that have never been touched by humans. Why? Because every time a modern day human gets close to one, they get killed. So then what happens? They still exist in this little Amazon pocket, and they have never had contact with the outside world. So they are this tiny tribe of hunter-gatherers, and they have no idea that cars exist. They have no idea that electricity exists. They have no idea that a mattress exists. I mean, just imagine dropping off a mattress to these people, how much that would benefit their life, you know, or just dropping off like a physical therapist, you know, that could benefit them greatly. But if we did drop off any sort of medical professional or therapist or chemist, they're going to be seen as a god, because who is this person who knows how to do these crazy things? You know, it's like outside of their belief. And so they're going to be like, oh my God, right? So in the same way that every single time we try to go visit these little Amazonian people, they kill us and we say, okay, we're going to stop, is the same way that beings up there, according to Stephen Greer, want to come visit us, but every single time they come to visit us, we kill them, so they stop, right? And it makes perfect sense to me, right? And so yeah, that's kind of my thing. You know, in Arizona, Stephen Greer had organized an event where everybody who is open, who's peaceful, who's willing to contact the other beings in the universe, they all got together in Arizona, and they put out this dog whistle kind of frequency. I don't know. Apparently, there's a company called Skywatch or something like that, and they've created this thing called the dog whistle that they've called the dog whistle. And it's basically this very specific machine that puts out a very specific frequency pulse, but every single time they activate the machine, they have spottings of UAP. And so that's kind of the whole reason why they went out there. And so while they had this big, massive group of people who were peaceful and who were willing to communicate and who weren't going to go get scared and panicky and freak out, while they had this big, massive group of people there, they were actually able to see a whole bunch of phenomena that can't be explained by science. So God forbid there was a scientist there who was going to publish a paper, right? You know, those things don't exist. Oh my God, they're everywhere like mosquitoes, you know? It's just like, and so yeah, you know, it's one of those things to me where why be scared of them? We've existed for thousands and thousands of years, and they haven't come to kill and enslave us all. So they're not going to. Why be scared? There's nothing to be scared of, right? They're not demonic. They've been around since the beginning of time. And quite frankly, they were probably around a lot longer before we even were created. And they may have even had some sort of influence in the creation of this planet. So it's kind of stupid to think that, oh my God, having insects coming in now. It's kind of crazy to have this like, oh my God, you know, we're all gonna die. No, we're not. They still have no interest that you're just running over to Chipotle to grab a quick burrito and go home to watch Netflix. Trust me, there's more interesting things out in the universe than that. And so, yeah. But I just wanted to make that a mention because I know, you know, Tucker Carlson going on Joe Rogan and saying that these things are demonic is probably like the worst and the most naive thing that can be done, because all that's going to do is make people more scared of them. We don't need people more scared of things that already exist in the environment and that have existed in the environment for thousands of years. You know, what would have been more productive is to say, oh yeah, there's all these things flying around and, you know, yeah, who knows where they're from. That would have been a shorter conversation. That puts everybody at ease. Well, for at least people, yeah. I don't know, the American system is kind of dumb. But there's just so many blind spots that we've created because of the way we designed this country from the get-go. Which has its benefits, has its drawbacks. Okay, well, I'm gonna stop talking about that because I'm hungry and I want to have some dinner. But the moral of the story is there's nothing to be afraid of. Yeah, these things exist. Cool. It would be interesting to get to interact with them. I think that'd be pretty cool because they're obviously from other planets. And don't get me wrong, I would absolutely love to go on a joyride. I'm an absolute adventurer. I would love to go on a joyride and be like, hey, you guys are now friendly with us. Can you take me to where you're from? Please, I want to see, you know? And that would be pretty slick, you know? So anyways, okay, I'm out of here. Good night.